This is Tom Fox. Welcome to episode 304 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all services compliance related. Today I have with me Brad Davis. Brad is the CEO and founder of a data and information security firm called TechIttoMe. I visit with Brad on the general concept or topic of information governance, which includes information security and data privacy. Brad explains how information security is critical for any corporation, from the largest multinational to the one-person lawyer who might happen to be podcasting. It's a very interesting way to think about compliance, because he explains how compliance in the information governance world is a critical component. The episode comes in at just around 20 minutes. I think you will find it very interesting, and it's certainly a topic that we're going to explore further on this podcast and my blog. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today we're going to take it in a little bit different direction, but it's a direction I think is really important and one that I'm beginning to study more and more. I have with me Brad Davis. Brad is the founder CEO of a data security company called TechIttoMe. And I have to say, it's located in Lubbock, Texas. For those of you who don't know where Lubbock is, welcome to God's country. Brad, I checked out Brad's website, and he had some really interesting video blogs he's put up that we're going to talk about at length. But Brad, I wanted to first ask you kind of what's your professional background and what led you to found TechIttoMe?
Certainly. Well, thank you so much. And first and foremost, thank you very much for having me on your podcast here. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And my personal background is really primarily rooted in financial institutions on the IT side of things. So started my professional career working for a financial institution in the IT department. And that's really where I became introduced, so to speak, to the IT compliance process. And from there went on to work for an IT provider focusing primarily on financial institutions. And with them, I worked really with a wide range of institutions, ranging from as small as 20 million in assets up to well over $1 billion in assets, and became much more versed in the IT compliance process, in the life cycle, in the importance of IT compliance. And at that point, I really started to kind of step back and to notice that in the market, there was a very significant need for small to mid-range businesses, primarily in the healthcare and financial services, with respect to maintaining IT compliance. And after many conversations with these people, really what I like to say is that I fell in love with the type of person that runs a small brokerage, with the type of person that runs a private practice, and really decided that those are the people that I wanted to help. And so set about doing that. And that was when TechIttoMe came about. We are an IT partner for local businesses, nonprofit organizations, and we really focus on the small sector.
So last fall in the presidential election, I was being interviewed, or during the presidential election, I was being interviewed, and in the middle of the interview, it dawned on me, I said, well, what is going to be your business response as a company if someone puts out a fake story about you? And the person who was asking me said, well, that only happens in politics. Well, unfortunately, we've seen that it happens a lot now. But that really led me, Brad, to think about that, not in the context of the political realm, but in the context of the data security realm. Because one of the allegations from the election was of data theft. And in the corporate world, it's not so much not important, but companies don't realize the security they may not have, which opens them up to that. And that's one of the things that really intrigued me about your site. You really take that head on for the small and mid-sized business. But in your opening remarks, you said something that really struck me, which was the process of IT compliance. So I was wondering if you could walk us through the process of IT compliance, and then maybe talk about why data security is so important for a medium to small size business?
Sure, certainly. So, and I'm really glad that you picked up on the process side of things, because it very much is a process, and it's a process that is extremely, I would say, mobile. So we can transfer that from department to department in larger organizations. We can also transfer it from industry to industry, and the process is really cut and dry. And it starts with taking a look at a real honest, hard look at our policies and especially our procedures. That's one thing that we see that regulators are really starting to hammer down on is procedures. And certainly, you mentioned data protection and data security. And one of the biggest procedures that helps to ensure the integrity of data and ensure the continuity of business is your business continuity plan. And that's part of that right there. And so we look at all of the policies and, ranging from things like acceptable use and so on and so forth, and really your end user training as well. And then we kind of following along in that process, it leads us right over into where we really start to test the validity and how sturdy your policies really are and the implementation of those. And in the IT realm, we can look at this as a couple different ways. When it comes down to the auditing process, there are a couple different ways to think about auditing. And that is, one of them is a penetration test. So that's really coming outside from the outside in. Another one is a social engineering test. So it's when I try to get you to give up sensitive information or information that may give me access to your network. And the final one there is the vulnerability assessment. And the last two, the social engineering and the vulnerability assessment, can kind of go hand in hand with respect to data integrity and data security. And a lot of organizations focus on penetration testing, on having a firewall in place and having that kind of security and making sure that nobody can get in, but they don't really spend a lot of time training end users, really investing in their internal technology and their internal processes to ensure that A, somebody's not giving out information they shouldn't be giving out, and B, there aren't any, I would say, any chinks in the armor, so to speak, on the inside of things. And that's really where we see the vast majority of businesses kind of have what we refer to as M&M security, so hard on the outside and soft on the inside. And that's what we like to bring to the table.
That is a great phrase. You just became the title of this podcast, M&M security. Excellent.
Hard on the outside, soft on the inside. Mm-hmm.
So one of the other concepts from my world of compliance, which is anti-corruption compliance, is you mentioned auditing, but the technique of ongoing monitoring, and in using monitoring as sort of a continuous feedback loop to feed back into your compliance program to remediate, update, upgrade as necessary. Is that part of the IT compliance as well?
Oh, absolutely. So once the audit takes place and we have the audit reports and we have everything that we can take a look at and go through and do our risk assessment and really identify what needs to be addressed and what doesn't. And then we get to the remediation phase where we actually go in and start making these security changes. But what's most important about the remediation stage in the IT world is like you had mentioned, the ongoing monitoring and management and documentation of the changes that have been made and ensuring that those changes continue on into perpetuity, because it makes no benefit. It's really no benefit to anyone to make a change in Q1 that doesn't last throughout Q4. And then by the time the next audit rolls around, that exact same vulnerability comes up as a repeat finding. So the ongoing monitoring and management of those remediations, of those fixes, and of those security patches and things along those lines becomes absolutely paramount.
So, Brad, you have a video blog entitled Cybersecurity and You, and it's subtitled, "It's Not Just for the Big Boys." Why do you advocate medium to small size business really has the same need for some type of cybersecurity as a multinational, multi-billion-dollar organization?
Sure. So I would say that an SMB really does have the same type of need. Now, from a regulatory standpoint, just like with HIPAA or any other agency, there are items that are addressable and items that are required. I would say that in your larger multinational organizations, there becomes, when you look at the size and complexity of the organization, a lot of those items that are addressable really become required. They really are necessary. And in an SMB, they're not necessarily 100% necessary to ensure adequate security and adequate operations, but a certain degree is. And that degree, I would argue, is is significantly more than what is required per se. So a great topic of this that I like to mention is one of the items that is typically referred to as addressable is data encryption, not necessarily in transit, but also at rest. So when your data, when your protected health information or anything along those lines is sitting on your computers, is it encrypted? Do people have the ability to come up and plug in a device and walk away with it and be able to read it? And in some cases, it's required that that be encrypted, and I would argue that in a multinational, it absolutely positively should be encrypted. But even in an SMB, the risk there is high enough today that those types of items absolutely should be addressed and should be mitigated at least to a certain extent. So we don't necessarily have to have the same degree of encryption or the same level of protocols that are in place in a multinational, but we do need to have the ability to implement physical controls on the data, implement some type of security, certainly in transit, and at the very minimum, at rest on your server.
So in my world, Brad, the government would say something along the lines of the following, that your compliance program needs to fit your business. You don't have to have Exxon's program. You have to have a compliance program that's appropriate for your size, but more importantly, your risk. So as part of the process that TechIttoMe would go through is actually to help clients assess their cybersecurity risks?
Absolutely. And so we refer to that as taking a look at the size and complexity of the organization, just like you had mentioned, so that your IT compliance process is right sized, and we're not implementing processes that are overly disruptive to day-to-day operations. Now, IT by its very nature, when you're going in and remediating certain security findings, is going to be somewhat disruptive. And so I would say that, and certainly for an SMB, it is very important that the culture of compliance come down from the top down, and everybody understand why it is that these changes are being made. But yes, you're absolutely correct that even in SMB, what we do is we go in and we look at the size and complexity of the organization, what is really necessary, and what we can accept the risk on.
So, Brad, I wonder if we might pivot to some of the services that TechIttoMe offers. So could you go through tech support, managed security, and offsite backups?
Sure, absolutely. Man, you are talking my language. So what we really do here at TechIttoMe is first and foremost provide IT support for SMBs, for private practices, for local businesses, and we do that mainly because you guys, I guess, it's not your job to be an expert in IT, but it is our job to be an expert in IT, and we find that the overall security and the overall operations of an organization run much more smoothly when experts are in charge. So with that support comes ongoing remote monitoring and management of all of your assets, so all of your computers, your servers, your networking devices, if you would like that, and the remote monitoring and management of that. We also maintain and monitor your cybersecurity applications such as antivirus and anti-malware and web content filtering. So I would say that ransomware, I'm sure, is a buzzword that many people have heard of by now. And one of the big ways that ransomware can get onto a network is through the internet. And it's by no fault of anyone. It's just the way that certain people build malicious sites these days. And so web content filtering becomes a very integral piece to an overall cybersecurity platform, if you will.
So, Brad, one of the things that I'm beginning to hear more is the term information governance. And it encompasses several different topics, one of which is information and IT security. It also encompasses things a little bit broader, such as data privacy. As companies have to move towards the management of information and data, is the compliance process that you've articulated that you would use in IT or data security, is that a process you feel like would work across several different disciplines, perhaps of data privacy or perhaps the management of that data?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the overall IT governance, essentially. So the management of that data does actually work really, really nicely with this overall IT compliance process. And one of the key factors that we see here typically, and certainly in the SMB sector, is what this really boils down to, or a large piece of this boils down to, is vendor management. So most organizations don't have the infrastructure in place to really build out their own data management platform, their own data centers housing the data, and so on and so forth. And so we rely on vendors to do that. And so the vendor management aspect of this really becomes key when discussing data management with the overall IT governance and compliance process.
You know, you really should come talk to my people, because I was just on a call where I'm on a panel for a conference and the subject was vendor management. So good to see that it's a challenging issue across many different sectors. Well, Brad, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering two things. One, could you give us the website? And two, if anybody wanted to follow up with you directly via email, how would they do so?
Absolutely. Our website is www.techittome.com, TECHITTOME.com. And I am more than happy to field any and all email. My direct email address is brad.davis, that's DAVIS, at techittome.com.
Well, Brad, I appreciate taking the time to visit with me, and I have the suspicion that I will call upon you for some thoughts on IT security and information governance in the future.
Sounds perfect. I'm always here.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate us. It would certainly help our rankings. And if you have any questions, please email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening